Nearly half of Africa's borders, 44% of them, are perfectly straight lines. Not rivers, not mountain ranges, not the edges of tribes or kingdoms. Rulers. And the meeting where those lines got drawn didn't have a single African person in the room. That's not a coincidence, that's a floor plan, and we're going to see who drew it. In November 1884, 14 countries sent representatives to Berlin. Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, Italy, Spain. Plus observers like the United States, which claimed no African territory itself. The host was Otto von Bismarck, and the agenda was simple. European powers were racing each other into African territory so fast that they kept nearly going to war with each other over it. Berlin was where they agreed on the rules for carving up a continent they were, for the most part, still in the process of exploring. The outcome was the principle of effective occupation. If you wanted to claim African territory, you had to actually plant a flag and administer it, not just draw it on a map back home. That sounds tidy. In practice, it triggered a rush. Between 1885 and 1914, European powers signed over 200 bilateral treaties, trading rivers, ports, and inland territories the way you'd trade cards. By 1914, roughly 90% of Africa was under European control. Britain ended up with about 30% of the continent's territory, France about 36%. Here's the part that actually explains the straight lines. When European diplomats sat down to divide territory they'd often never visited, they weren't drawing around cities, farmland, or rivers most of the time. They were drawing between them, using latitude and longitude as reference points and connecting them with a ruler and a protractor. Look at the Egypt-Libya border, the Egypt-Sudan border, or the long straight run of the Namibia-Botswana line. These are lines of longitude and latitude turned into international boundaries. It was the fastest way to divide a continent nobody in the room had fully mapped, between governments who mostly cared about which European rival got which resources. The problem, those lines didn't care what was underneath them. Historians estimate the resulting borders split at least 177 distinct ethnic and linguistic groups across 2 or more countries. A kingdom that had existed for centuries could wake up one year split down the middle by a border its own people never agreed to and, in many cases, never even saw drawn. This is also where we have to be honest about complexity. Not every colonial border is a straight geometric line, and not every straight line comes straight from Berlin specifically. Many exact boundary lines were finalized in later bilateral treaties through the early 1900s, using Berlin's ground rules rather than Berlin's actual pen strokes. The conference set the rules of the game. The specific lines were often drawn in the years after, table by table. When African nations gained independence through the mid-20th century, they largely inherited these borders as is. The Organization of African Unity, the precursor to today's African Union, actually voted in 1964 to keep colonial-era borders fixed, on the logic that reopening any border dispute could open all of them at once. That decision has a real cost. Ethnic groups split across borders have fueled cross-border conflicts, secessionist movements, and governance challenges from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel for decades. It's also worth flagging directly. Some scholars argue the borders caused the conflict narrative oversimplifies things. Colonial extraction, resource competition, and Cold War-era proxy politics all layered on top of the borderlines afterward. The borders are a contributing structural cause, not the sole explanation for every conflict that followed. So the next time you see a country in Africa with a suspiciously straight edge, that's not geography. That's a decision made in a room in Berlin, or in one of 200 treaty rooms after it, by people deciding the future of a continent most of them had never set foot on. 44% of a continent's shape, decided by ruler and protractor, by outsiders in about 3 months. That's Africa's borders, and it's why the map still looks the way it does today.